Good afternoon and welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grebner with us as always to talk all things markets, University of Missouri's Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
Phew, it's going to be an in and out conversation today. There's not too much for us to get into. But before we talk about the big report or the only report this week, which is cattle on feed, let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, on the cattle side this week, cash cattle were about 75 cents higher for the week. I remind us that now puts them about 4.25 above where they were a year ago at this time. So although I think a lot of concern about those fed cattle prices, we are above year ago levels. If you look at feeder cattle markets, they were $2 to $8 higher this week. On the futures side, that April live cattle futures contract was down 55 cents, and the April feeder cattle futures contract was down $4.10. May corn futures were up nearly 18 cents on the week. I think that led to some of the weakness that we saw in those feeder cattle futures. The choice box beef price was basically unchanged for the week. That actually puts now the choice box beef price $15 below where it was a year ago at this time. So big change as we were a few weeks ago talking about those prices being well above year ago levels. On the hog side, cash barrel gilt prices about $1.80 higher this week. The April lean hog futures contract was up a little more than $3 on the week. The pork cutout value also a big growth this week, up $5.70. That puts that nearly $27 above year ago levels. We had strength across the board in all those components on the pork cutout value.
Definitely some demand for bacon here at home, among other things elsewhere as well.
That's right, boy. It was a strong week. That tells you what's happening on the pork side for sure. And we need to keep eating that bacon, right?
So I want to talk a little bit about, we talked a little bit about this last week too, but we keep seeing consistently higher cash hog prices and hog prices just in general. What are some things that producers need to think about, and how also is even the current economic picture playing into demand strength and obviously price support as well?
Yeah, so I think, when you look, a lot of things have been on the positive side for us on hogs in particular. Um, ASF issues in places like China continue to kind of rear their head. It gives us an opportunity for prices to go higher in this country. Is the idea that maybe China needs more pork again this year than might have been the case earlier as ASF takes a grip there. I do think we continue to see a lot of pent up demand here in this country as well, as folks want to think that COVID-19 is over, and we'll figure that out in the coming weeks and months. But they're ready to get out and about, and I think that's creating some stronger domestic demand. Pork being a part of that. I also like to continue to remind us that we're running hog slaughter below year ago levels. I think that combination of what was several years in a row where we had really strong growth in slaughter has now stopped and we're down. I think tighter supplies have also been a part of this run up. All those things could change quickly, right? Big old COVID outbreak could send us pork prices lower. We'll just have to, as producers, think about when it's time to let somebody else have that risk. And I've probably been saying that for a while, and prices have just been moving up. But it's still at play here.
Well, we're not looking for grand slams or home runs every day, right? Every at bat. I think I'm picking up on on your spiel.
That's right. You have it right. It's if we could all pick the tops of these markets, the average would move up as well, Megan. I'd say all the time.
So you mentioned hog or slaughter just in general. As we take a look at slaughter numbers this week, a decline really on both cattle and the hogs.
Yeah, so for sure, I think that as we look for the week ending March 20th, 624,000 head of cattle expected to be slaughtered. That's 23,000 head or 3.6% below a week ago. So smaller cattle slaughter this week. Hogs really jumps out, 2.524 million head expected by USDA, down 54,000 or about 2% relative to a week ago. That you look year to date, cattle down 3.3%, hogs down 4.4%. The supply side's helping push these prices, especially on the hog side, higher.
The one big report this week, Scott, cattle on feed came out this afternoon, and let's walk through that report.
Yeah, so generally, what we got out of the report here this afternoon is not a lot different than the pre-report estimates. On feed as of March 1st was at 101.6% of a year ago, so up slightly. That falls really close in line with pre-report estimates placed in February. Came in at 98.1. That's a little bit above the midpoint of the range for February. I think everybody was trying to factor in just how much that very cold weather that really shuttered some feeder cattle markets for a while and movement of cattle generally in this country, how much that was going to drive placements in February lower, and it certainly did. So by and large, that report came in where we wanted and or where we pre-report thought, and not a lot of surprises there.
What does that do for us as we look ahead to markets next week? And even maybe as we look at some of other factors like drought conditions and that as we move ahead in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, so I guess for me, I look at the placement number in particular and I say we're getting below year ago levels. Uh, that's the good news, right? So hopefully we get out in the latter part of this year and talk about then slaughter ready supplies also down relative to a year ago. So that maybe continues what we've already started the year on lower slaughter. We'll have to wait and see. But those are the again positives for me. Let's hope we don't talk about coming back with a big placement number when we look at what happened in March. Now I remind us that we're going to start comparing ourselves to the COVID outbreak here the next couple months. So what might look like big placement numbers uh, are only because of the base against which we're comparing. So we'll have to be careful with that one.
Does that potentially have impact on the markets as well? I mean, if we look like we have a big placement, does the market take into consideration that we are comparing to a massive disruption because of a global pandemic? How does that potentially play out?
Yes, I think you'll see those that are doing pre-report estimates will very definitely understand what they're doing in terms of that comparison. But I just encourage folks to look twice at the number before you make a decision about whether that's a bullish or bearish report that we get out from USDA when we start looking at next month and the following month's reports.
One of the other things we're going to talk about today is the long-term outlook from FAPRI. Talk to me a little bit about some of the highlights for you and some things that we need to take into consideration.
Yeah, all right, so generally, and I talk about this outlook. So the FAPRI outlook will look 10 years into the future. So it's a long-term outlook. I always say the thing I know with certainty about year 10 is that we'll be wrong. But it's a good yardstick about the direction, I guess, is the way I think about it. And I'll start by saying, we look over the next several years and we expect that meat production growth will continue to be slower than we've just come out of in the previous 5 years. I think that helps from a price side. So when you look at prices that are projected, really across the board, we see strength coming in front of us. Um, both in cattle and hogs in particular, not the record prices maybe that we saw back in 2014 in both of those commodities, but stronger than what we've come out of in 2020. So I think a better situation from a profitability standpoint. Of course, we'll continue to say exports matter in this discussion as well. Perhaps it's even more important to say China matters in this discussion. It could get more positive or more negative depending on that export growth out of the United States. We expect exports of both of those products to slowly grow as we look ahead.
You mentioned China, and I do want to ask you one quick question before we before we wrap up this week. We saw the first meeting between the Biden administration and China following, or the first meeting of the administration. Is that something that we need to continue to monitor about how those talks go and how that potentially lays out for the relationship and trading relationship between our two countries?
Yes. Do I have to answer more than yes?
Yes.
So, it is critical. I shouldn't joke here too much. Um, I think we're going to set the tone for trade between the two countries. And from an ag perspective, we need more of our commodities going to China, not less of our commodities. And if trade tensions were to get to the point that that affects our ability to trade beef and pork to China looking ahead, that's problematic. It means we just push more of that product back on domestic markets. So we are going to want to watch very carefully. It is a change, and for me now we're starting to see a little bit more about how this administration is going to deal with China. It's been kind of it's been quiet up until what we've seen this week. So very, very important to watch the signals out of that event.
Anything else this week, Scott?
I think we've covered it for this week, Megan. We'll
It
be
was a
short, right?
whole week for us to go through all this stuff. All right. It's always good to see you. As we look ahead to next week, a much busier week for us. What are some of the reports that we're watching out for?
Yeah, so it is a full slate. Cold storage next week, hogs and pigs, and we also get then livestock slaughter.
All right. We will talk to you next Friday. Have your dancing shoes on because I'm going to keep you on your toes.
That sounds great.
To every weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning, visit our website, brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments as well. And for all of the great Brownfield podcasts, as you're getting ready to spend some time in the tractor this spring, go to brownfieldagnews.com/podcast. Have a great weekend. We will talk to you next Friday. I'm Megan Grebner for Brownfield.